A millionaire was stunned during Christmas dinner when he saw his ex-girlfriend with triplets at his mother's house. Mark sat on a wooden bench beneath the shade of a sprawling tree in the Central Park. He watched children running and playing, their faces glowing with innocence and joy, while parents followed them with looks of pride and affection. The scene stirred something deep within him. Despite having everything he had ever dreamed of, luxury cars, a stunning mansion, he couldn't shake the persistent feeling of loneliness. His mother's words echoed in his mind. Life isn't measured by what you own, but by the connections you build. As he observed a little boy trying to toss a ball into a hoop, he wondered if he had wasted too much time chasing material goals. From a young age, Mark had been driven. Growing up in a modest home, he had vowed to change his destiny. Through hard work and determination, he built an empire. But as he climbed the ladder of success, he left behind things that now seemed vital. One of those was Elizabeth. When a group of children ran past him, their laughter transported him back in time. He remembered how Elizabeth used to laugh at his jokes, even the silly ones. Their relationship had been a rare blend of trust and genuine love, something he hadn't felt again since. Over the years, his relentless focus on work and inability to prioritize her had pushed her away. Elizabeth had been clear about what she needed, but he always found an excuse to delay spending time with her. One day, she simply left. Mark told himself it was for the best. He believed that his career and achievements would outweigh any personal losses. But now, sitting in that park and watching parents cherish simple moments with their kids, he realized how wrong he had been. Pulling out his phone, he scrolled through his schedule. It was packed with meetings, calls, and endless commitments. Yet none of it brought him any real sense of fulfillment. He slid the phone back into his pocket and looked around once more. A small girl tripped and fell nearby. Mark leaned forward to help her, but before he could, her mother rushed over, gently lifting and comforting her. The scene sent a pang through his chest. He wondered what it might be like to have a family of his own, to share moments like that. But he quickly brushed off the thought, convincing himself that it wasn't for him. He had spent too much time alone, and his life was too rigidly structured to accommodate the chaos of family life. An older man walking through the park with his dog paused briefly to greet him. Though surprised by the gesture, Mark responded with a faint smile. He wasn't used to people's spontaneity. The short interaction made him reflect on how much he had isolated himself in his bubble of luxury and work. The sun was sinking toward the horizon, painting the sky with warm hues of orange and pink. Its light shimmered on the nearby lake, where children tossed crumbs to the ducks. Mark rose from the bench, feeling he had lingered there long enough. While the park's atmosphere gave him a moment to think, it also reminded him of what he had lost. With his hands in his pockets and his gaze distant, he slowly headed toward the exit. Passing by a balloon vendor, he paused, briefly considering buying one for no particular reason. In the end, he kept walking. His thoughts were torn between the person he had worked so hard to become and the man he felt he truly was, a prisoner of his own choices. When he reached his car, he hesitated before opening the door. He caught a glimpse of his reflection in the car window. He looked polished, a tailored suit, a limited edition watch, and shoes gleaming like they were brand new. But behind that perfect exterior, he felt worn out. He got into the car and started the engine, letting its soft hum break the silence. On his way back to his mansion, images from the park lingered in his mind. He considered calling his mum, something he rarely did. She had always been his greatest supporter, even when she disagreed with his decisions. Stopping at a red light, he pulled out his phone and dialed her number. "Mark, what a surprise," she answered warmly, her voice immediately grounding him. "Hi, Mum. I just wanted to hear your voice. How are you?" he asked, unsure of what had prompted the call. I'm fine, as always. But the real question is, how are you? You sound different. Mark hesitated before replying. I don't know. I just feel like something's missing. I'm tired, I guess. His mum was silent for a moment before offering her wisdom. Maybe what you're missing isn't in your work or the things you own. Maybe it's time to think about what truly matters. Her words stayed with him as they ended the call. When he got home, he dropped his keys and phone on the entryway table and made his way to the living room. The automatic lights illuminated a space that showcased his success, but felt devoid of life. He sat on the couch, staring at the city lights through the massive windows. His mother's words echoed in his mind. He knew she was right, but had no idea where to begin. As he watched the blinking lights of the skyscrapers, he made a quiet decision. It was time for a change. Although he didn't know exactly how, it was clear that the first step was to admit his life needed more than just work and success. Mark closed his eyes, allowing himself a rare moment of stillness. For the first time in years, he felt a faint glimmer of hope. Like maybe there was something more meaningful out there for him. The next morning, Mark woke up early, but the restlessness from the night before lingered. He had spent hours tossing and turning, haunted by his mother's words and the images of the park that had stuck with him since the day before. His mansion, pristine and impeccably designed, felt emptier than ever. The echo of his own footsteps as he made his way to the kitchen served as a stark reminder of his solitude. He quickly brewed some coffee, sat at the marble island, and stared at his tablet, scrolling through the day's agenda. Meetings, calls, lunch with important clients, and yet another night, likely ending with him getting home late. The routine that once gave him a sense of purpose now felt overwhelming and hollow. With a sigh, he closed the tablet, leaving his coffee half finished. As he headed to his office, his mind drifted to the past. He thought about simpler times, before success had consumed every corner of his existence. His childhood had been modest, shaped by his mother's hard work and unwavering dedication after his father's passing. She spent long hours running a small neighborhood shop, but always managed to carve out time to listen to him and encourage his dreams. Growing up without a father figure had pushed him to become independent at an early age. Determined to spare his mother the sacrifices she had made, he promised himself he would achieve success at any cost. With that resolve, he studied hard, worked tirelessly, and eventually built a fortune from nothing. But as he climbed higher, he left behind the things and people that truly mattered. One memory haunted him most. Elizabeth. She had been the one true love of his life, but also the greatest casualty of his ambition. They had met at a business conference where she worked as an organizer, and their connection was immediate. Elizabeth had an energy that cut through the tension of corporate life. Her laugh was infectious, and her simple human outlook on the world captivated him. In the early years of their relationship, Mark felt different, lighter. Elizabeth helped him see beyond the spreadsheets and deadlines, teaching him to appreciate the little things. But as his company grew, so did the demands on his time and attention. Weekends together were replaced with business trips, and romantic dinners gave way to endless meetings. There was one night he could never forget. Elizabeth had planned a special dinner to celebrate their anniversary. The table was set with candles, and the scent of his favorite dish filled the room. But Mark arrived late, too consumed by an urgent work call to notice what he had lost. When he finally sat at the table, his attention was still divided between his phone and the stack of papers he had brought along. "Mark, can we just have one evening to ourselves?" Elizabeth asked, her voice a mix of frustration and sadness. "I'm sorry, it's just a tough week. I promise I'll make it up to you soon," he replied, not even glancing up from the report he was reviewing. That turned out to be one of the last meals they ever shared together. A few days later, Elizabeth packed her bags and left. There was no fight, no dramatic scene, just a short note explaining that she couldn't stay in a relationship where she always came last. At the time, Mark shrugged it off, convinced she would come back once she understood his priorities. But days turned into weeks, weeks into years, and Elizabeth never returned. Now, sitting at his office desk, surrounded by piles of contracts, he wondered how he had let someone so important slip away. The ring of his phone snapped him out of his thoughts. It was Laura, his assistant, reminding him he had a meeting in an hour. "Thanks, Laura. I'll be there," he said. But he didn't move. Instead, he opened a desk drawer and pulled out a wooden box he had kept for years. Inside were old photographs, memories of a time when he still believed he could balance love and ambition. One photo showed him and Elizabeth on the beach, barefoot, smiling with the carefree joy of living in the moment. He traced the edges of the photo with his fingers, feeling a wave of nostalgia wash over him. He had spent so long chasing his goals that he had forgotten what it meant to truly live. Closing the box, he put it back in the drawer, but the feelings it stirred lingered. By the time he made it to the meeting, his colleagues could tell he was distracted. Although he tried to focus on the discussion, his mind kept drifting back to memories of Elizabeth and his mother's advice. When the meeting ended, he decided to cancel the rest of his day's appointments. He drove aimlessly through the city, letting his thoughts wander. He passed places that once held meaning for him, like the little cafe where he and Elizabeth used to meet before their relationship unraveled. Parking in front of the now renovated shop, he stared at the familiar facade, hesitant to go inside for fear of confronting the memories. That night, back at his mansion, Mark decided to call his mother. Though they spoke often, he usually avoided personal topics. This time, however, he felt a need for her guidance. "Son, you sound troubled. What's on your mind?" she asked after a few minutes of casual conversation. "Mom, I'm tired. I've achieved everything I ever wanted, but I still feel like something's missing." She paused before replying. "Mark, maybe what you're looking for isn't in business. Sometimes you have to look back to understand what you've left behind." His words struck him with an unexpected intensity. He knew they were true, yet he also understood that facing the past wouldn't be simple. As he hung up the phone, he made a decision he hadn't dared in years, to reconnect with more than just contracts and numbers. He resolved to rebuild bonds with the people who truly mattered. Mark arrived at his mother's house on a calm afternoon. The home, modest but inviting, was adorned with small holiday decorations. Twinkling lights framed the window, and a wreath of dried flowers hung on the front door. Stepping out of the car, he caught the scent of freshly baked bread in the air, instantly transporting him back to his childhood. Although he rarely said it out loud, visiting this place always brought him comfort. His mother greeted him with a warm smile, as though no time had passed since their last meeting. She wore a white apron with faint flower stains, and her face radiated joy at having her son home. "Mark, my boy, it's so good to see you. Come in. I was making something special," she said, pulling him into a tight embrace. Mark returned the hug, a rare gesture for him, but one that felt right in the moment. They walked into the house together, and his mother led him to the kitchen, where a tray of cookies was cooling on the table. The space was cozy, filled with small touches that reflected her love for her home. They settled into the living room, where the soft crackle of the fireplace added warmth to the atmosphere. Mark's eyes wandered to the photographs on the walls, snapshots of his childhood that stirred a mix of nostalgia and longing. One picture, in particular, always drew his attention. A young version of himself, holding a balloon in the park, his mother by his side. "How have you been, Mom?" he asked, breaking the silence. "Oh, I'm doing well, as always. My garden is thriving this year, and the neighbors have been so kind. But tell me about you, son. How are you?" she replied, pouring 2 cups of tea. Mark paused before answering, not wanting to burden her with his worries. "I've been fine. Just a little tired. Work takes up most of my time, but I'm used to it," he said with a faint smile. She gave him a knowing look, but didn't press further. She understood her son well enough to know he didn't always share what he truly felt. They spent the afternoon chatting about light-hearted topics like her gardening plans and the happenings in the neighborhood. Mark found comfort in the simplicity of their conversation, a sharp contrast to the tense meetings and endless obligations of his daily life. Yet, deep down, his mother sensed there was more to his visit, something he wasn't ready to talk about. As evening approached, she rose from her seat and went to the kitchen, returning with a box adorned with festive holiday designs. She handed it to Mark. "This is for you, son. It's a reminder that no matter what happens, you always have a place here." Mark opened the box and discovered a collection of cookies along with a handwritten note tucked inside. The note read, "Family will always be your greatest success." Those simple yet powerful words struck a chord in him, stirring emotions he didn't anticipate. As he carefully closed the box, his mother seized the moment to make a suggestion. "I want you to spend Christmas here this year. It's been so long since we've celebrated the holidays together, and I think it would do you good to take a break from everything for a while." Mark hesitated. He knew she had a point, but the idea of spending Christmas there also meant facing feelings he had buried for years. "I'm not sure, Mom. I've got a lot going on at the office. Maybe next year," he offered, hoping it would suffice. But she wasn't easily swayed. "Mark, you always say that. I understand work is important to you, but life doesn't wait. If you don't make time for what really matters, one day you'll realize it's too late." Her words hit him hard. He knew she was right, even if admitting it wasn't easy. After a moment of silence, he exhaled and nodded. "All right, Mum. I'll spend Christmas with you." She smiled, a look of triumph softening her face. "I'm glad to hear that. I'm planning something special this year, and I think it's going to be a Christmas you won't forget." Mark didn't press for details, but her tone sparked his curiosity. As night fell, he said his goodbyes, promising to return soon. Driving back to his home, her words lingered in his thoughts. He knew his mother had always been his biggest supporter, even during the times he was too preoccupied to notice. Now, with her invitation to spend Christmas together, he felt a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. When he got home, he set the box of cookies on the kitchen counter and stared at it for a few moments. The words from the note echoed in his mind, a reminder that even though he had achieved all his dreams, something was still missing. He sank into the couch in the living room, gazing at the city lights outside the window. For the first time in a long while, he felt there might be a chance to reconnect with what truly mattered. Though he wasn't sure what Christmas with his mum would bring, he sensed it was a step in the right direction. He closed his eyes, letting the day's exhaustion melt away. But his mother's words continued to resonate. "Family will always be your greatest success." Elizabeth woke early, just like every other day, to the jarring sound of her alarm clock, which left no room for lingering under the covers. Morning light seeped through the worn curtains of her small apartment, brightening a simple yet tidy room. The cheerful voices of her daughters echoed from the next room, filling the space with giggles and playful shouts as they prepared for the day ahead. She jumped out of bed, threw a sweater over her pajamas, and headed straight to the kitchen to start breakfast. The rich aroma of coffee filled the room as she prepared a plate of toast for the girls. They were buzzing with energy, darting around the table while eagerly awaiting their meal. Mom, can we go to the park after school today?" one of them asked, her smile lighting up the entire kitchen. Elizabeth grinned as she poured herself a cup of coffee. "If you finish your homework on time, we can go," she replied, gently running her fingers through one of their heads before taking a seat. While the triplets ate breakfast, Elizabeth found herself reflecting on how much her life had changed over the years. Things had taken a dramatic turn ever since she decided to leave Mark. Although she had loved him deeply, she knew staying meant continuing to feel invisible, a shadow behind his relentless ambition. She had tried to talk to him countless times, but he always seemed too busy to listen. Dinners had turned into lonely affairs, conversations into work monologues, and the love they once shared had slowly faded away. When she found out she was pregnant, she was overwhelmed with uncertainty. The thought of raising her daughters alone was terrifying, but staying and enduring Mark's indifference felt even worse. With a broken heart, she left him a note explaining her decision and walked away before she could change her mind. She found a modest place to rebuild her life, far from the luxury and success they had shared. Over the years, she worked tirelessly to support her daughters, facing the challenges of single motherhood, but staying determined to give them a better life. That morning, as she walked to work after dropping the girls off at school, Elizabeth thought about the sacrifices she had made and the secrets she had kept. She had never told Mark about their daughters, not because she wanted to hide them from him, but because she feared he wasn't ready for the responsibility. For years, she told herself she had made the right choice, though the weight of that decision often haunted her. Her job at a small local boutique wasn't glamorous, but it provided the stability she needed to care for her girls. Her days were spent helping customers, organizing inventory, and dreaming of a brighter future for her family. Despite the struggles, she found joy in small moments, the hugs from her daughters at the end of the day, their laughter while they played together, and the rare, peaceful moments when she could sit and read a book. One afternoon, as her shift at the shop was ending, she received an unexpected call. It was Mark's mother. Although they had lost touch after Elizabeth left, they had always maintained a respectful relationship. Hearing her voice stirred a mix of surprise and nervousness in Elizabeth. "Elizabeth, I know this call is out of the blue, but I need to talk to you," the woman said, in a tone that was both kind and firm. "Of course, ma'am. Is everything all right?" Elizabeth asked, unsure of what to expect. "I want to invite you to my Christmas dinner this year. I know you and Mark aren't in touch, but I think it's time to heal some wounds." Elizabeth paused, taking a moment to process the invitation. The thought of facing Mark after so many years filled her with a mix of anxiety and curiosity. "I'm not sure that's a good idea. So much has happened," she began, but Mark's mother gently interrupted. "I understand, Elizabeth, but I want you to think about it. I believe this could be an important moment for everyone." After the call ended, Elizabeth sat in silence, reflecting on the invitation. She knew facing Mark would be challenging, but deep down, she felt it might be time to confront the past she had been avoiding for so long. That evening, while having dinner with her daughters, she watched their innocent and joyful faces. She wondered what their lives might look like if they had a chance to know their father, if they could build a connection with him. Though she was scared of how Mark would react to learning the truth, she realized she couldn't keep it hidden forever. In the days that followed, Elizabeth found herself thinking more and more about the invitation. Memories of the happy times she shared with Mark resurfaced. Their laughter and love before work and ambition drove them apart. She also remembered the heartbreak of his departure, the uncertainty of raising her daughters alone, and the nights spent questioning whether she had made the right choices. After much soul-searching, she finally decided to accept the invitation. Facing Mark wouldn't be easy, but she knew she couldn't keep carrying the burden of her secret. On Christmas morning, Elizabeth woke up early to prepare. She helped her daughters dress in their best outfits, explaining they were going to meet someone special. While she didn't give them all the details, she wanted them to be ready for what was coming. As she stood in front of the mirror, getting herself ready, she felt a mix of nerves and resolve. She knew the night would change their lives forever, but she trusted she was making the right decision. Looking at her daughters playing in the living room, she smiled. No matter what happened, she was determined to face it for them. When it was time to leave, she held each of her daughters' hands and stepped out of the apartment. The crisp evening air wrapped around them as they walked to the car that would take them to Mark's mother's house. With every step closer, Elizabeth couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to take an unexpected turn. Mark's mother's house glowed with soft, twinkling Christmas lights, creating a warm and festive atmosphere. The scent of freshly cooked food wafted through the air, mingling with the faint sound of Christmas carols playing in the background. Elizabeth arrived with her daughters, who gazed in awe at the sparkling decorations and the magical glow of the lights. Ella took a deep breath before knocking on the door, trying to steady the nerves that had been building up for days. Mark's mother opened the door with a wide smile, her face lighting up with genuine warmth at the sight of them. She leaned in to hug Elizabeth, then crouched down to greet the girls, who responded shyly, but with curiosity. "Welcome. Come in. Everything is ready for dinner," she said enthusiastically, leading them inside. Elizabeth glanced around, taking in the familiar details she remembered from the few times she had visited before. The photos still adorned the walls, and a large, perfectly decorated Christmas tree stood as the centerpiece of the living room. Though she tried to stay calm, her mind raced, imagining the moment she would see Mark. The girls, thrilled by the festive atmosphere, began exploring the room, examining every detail. Mark's mother showed them the tree and even let them hang a few more ornaments, which made them smile. Elizabeth watched them, feeling a mix of pride and unease. She knew that what was about to happen would change their lives forever. Meanwhile, Mark arrived at the house a few minutes later. He parked in the driveway and sat in the car for a moment, staring at the lights twinkling on the porch. He had agreed to his mother's invitation, but something about the evening felt different. Over the past few days, she'd insisted that this Christmas would be special, though she hadn't shared many details. Finally, he turned off the engine, stepped out of the car, and adjusted his jacket before heading to the door. As he walked in, he was greeted with a warm hug from his mother and the familiar aroma of Christmas dinner wafting through the house. He smiled as he greeted her, but his mind was split between the present and the memories this home always stirred. He made his way to the living room, expecting to find the other guests, but stopped abruptly when he entered. Standing before him was Elizabeth. His heart seemed to skip a beat as he saw her after all these years. She stood near the tree, her expression a blend of surprise and nervousness. Around her, 3 small girls were playing with the ornaments on the tree. Mark felt as though the air had been sucked out of the room as he tried to process what he was seeing. Elizabeth whispered his name almost breathlessly, unable to tear her eyes away from him. Although she had anticipated this moment, she couldn't stop the lump that formed in her throat. She took a step toward him, attempting to keep her composure. "Hi, Mark," she said softly, her voice steady, despite the slight tremble in her hands. The silence that followed was broken by the girls, who turned to look at the man who had just arrived. Their identical bright eyes sparkled with curiosity. Mark couldn't stop staring at them, noticing the dark hair and features that struck him as eerily familiar. "Who are they?" he finally asked, though deep down he already suspected the answer. Elizabeth took a deep breath before responding, knowing she couldn't avoid the question. "They are our daughters," she said, her voice firm but laden with emotion. The weight of her words hit him immediately. Mark felt as though the ground beneath him was shifting. He looked at Elizabeth, hoping for some sign that this was all a misunderstanding, but the honesty in her expression left no room for doubt. "How could you not tell me?" he asked, his voice trembling under the weight of shock, confusion, and anger. Elizabeth held his gaze, though the pain in her eyes was unmistakable. "It was a decision I made at the time. I thought it was what was best for them. And for you. You weren't ready to be a father, Mark. I wasn't ready to face it alone either. But I did what I believed was right." Mark ran a hand through his hair, trying to process everything he'd just heard. The girls watched him curiously, unaware of the tension filling the room. One of them, the boldest of the group, slowly approached him, holding a small Christmas ornament in her tiny hands. "Are you our dad?" she asked innocently, her voice breaking the silence. The question caught him off guard, but it also forced him to focus on what truly mattered. He looked at the little girl, then at Elizabeth, who nodded gently, giving him permission to step forward. Mark crouched to her level, meeting her gaze directly. "Yes," he finally said, his voice softening. "I think I am." His words came with a feeling of warmth he hadn't expected. The little girl smiled and handed him the ornament. The other two, encouraged by the interaction, also approached him, surrounding him with quiet curiosity. In that moment, Mark felt something shift deep within him. Though the situation was overwhelming, it was also undeniably beautiful. Elizabeth stood at a distance, tears welling in her eyes. She had feared this moment for so long, but seeing Mark with the girls sparked a hope she hadn't felt in years. Just then, Mark's mother entered the room, breaking the tension with her usual warmth. "It looks like you're starting to get to know each other," she said, her voice bright. "How about we all sit down for dinner?" She gestured to the dining table she had so carefully prepared. Everyone made their way to the dining room, where the atmosphere became noticeably lighter. Although there was still much to address, the first step had been taken. Over dinner, Mark listened closely as the girls shared their interests and dreams. He began asking them questions, trying to piece together who they were and what role he might play in their lives. Elizabeth, though still nervous, began to feel that perhaps accepting the invitation had been the right choice. For the first time in years, she saw the possibility of a brighter future, not just for her daughters, but for herself and Mark as well. Both of them understood that the road ahead would not be easy, but they were willing to try. Later that night, after the life-changing dinner, Mark found himself unable to sleep. His mind was flooded with questions, memories, and emotions he had buried for years. Learning he was the father of 3 girls had left him breathless, but it had also awakened something within him, something he could no longer ignore. You wanted to know more, understand what had happened, and, most importantly, why Elizabeth had chosen to keep you in the dark for so long. The next morning, as sunlight began to warm his mother's house, Mark spotted Elizabeth in the small backyard. She was sitting on a wooden bench, watching the girls play on the grass. Their laughter and carefree smiles contrasted sharply with her serious expression, lost deep in thought. He approached quietly, not wanting to intrude, but Elizabeth noticed him and gave him a faint smile. Mark sat beside her, the silence lingering briefly before he broke it. "Elizabeth, we need to talk. There are too many things I just don't understand," he said, his tone a mix of urgency and restraint. She nodded, knowing this conversation was inevitable. It was time to confront the truth, even though reliving those memories was bound to hurt. "I owe you an explanation, Mark," Elizabeth said, taking a deep breath as she gathered her thoughts. She started recounting how, in the final months of their relationship, she had felt increasingly invisible in his life. Mark had always been busy, focused on his career, consumed by his goals. Although she had tried to talk to him many times, he never seemed to truly listen. When I found out I was pregnant, I was scared. Scared of how you'd react, scared that you wouldn't want to take responsibility. But more than anything, I was afraid the girls would grow up feeling like they didn't matter to you, just like I felt during those last months, she admitted, her voice trembling. Mark lowered his gaze, her words striking a painful chord. He could see now how absorbed he had been in his own world, missing the signs of Elizabeth pulling away. "But why didn't you tell me afterward? Why didn't you give me a chance to be there for them?" he asked, trying to keep his frustration in check, though his voice betrayed a hint of it. Elizabeth sighed and picked up a fallen leaf from the nearby tree, turning it over in her hands. "I tried calling you once, months after I left," she began, her tone tinged with sorrow. "But when I did, I heard the sound of a meeting in the background. You were talking about a new project, and you sounded so happy, so focused. I couldn't go through with it. I thought it was better to let you keep living your life without that burden." Her words hit Mark like a hammer. He realized then how much his choices had impacted not just Elizabeth, but the daughters he hadn't known existed. "You were never a burden to me, Elizabeth, neither you nor the girls. I'm so sorry if I ever made you feel that way," he said, his voice heavy with sincerity. Elizabeth looked at him, surprised by the raw vulnerability in his tone. She had expected anger or resentment, but instead found genuine regret. "It was hard, Mark," she admitted, "raising them on my own, working to provide for us, making sure they never went without. But in the end, it was worth it. They're my greatest pride, and I would do it all over again if I had to," Mark responded with a mix of determination and gentleness. He watched the girls as they ran around the yard, their laughter filling the air. In them, he saw fragments of himself and Elizabeth, a blend that both fascinated and overwhelmed him. "I want to be a part of their lives, to be their father, even though I know I can't make up for lost time," he finally said, breaking the silence. Elizabeth looked at him again, this time with a faint smile, as if she might be ready to give him a chance. "That's up to you, Mark. They're wonderful girls, but they need more than words. They need action, commitment. If you really want to be there for them, you'll have to prove it." He nodded, accepting the challenge. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in years, he felt ready to try. He had found a purpose that went beyond his career or personal achievements. They spent the rest of the day at the house, talking about the years they had spent apart. Elizabeth shared stories about the girls, from their first steps to their unique personalities. Though it hurt to realize how much he had missed, Mark cherished hearing every detail. That night after the girls were asleep, Elizabeth and Mark sat in the living room, each holding a cup of tea. They talked about the future, brainstorming ways to work together to give their daughters the life they deserved. While there were wounds to heal and hurdles to overcome, they both knew this was the first step towards something better. Before heading to bed, Mark looked in on his daughters one last time. They were sound asleep in the room their mother had lovingly prepared for them. He silently vowed to do everything he could to be present in their lives, to be the father they needed and deserved. As the house settled into quiet, Elizabeth also reflected on the day. Although doubts and fears lingered, she felt she might have made the right choice in accepting Mark's mother's invitation. For the first time in years, she saw the possibility of a future where she didn't have to carry everything on her own. The clock struck midnight as they both finally went to bed. The road ahead was uncertain, but they shared one thing: hope. Hope that together they could create a new story for their daughters and themselves. The next morning, Mark woke up early, determined to start making things right. He had spent the night reflecting on Elizabeth's words and everything he had learned about his daughters in such a short time. He knew it wouldn't be easy to make up for lost time, but he was willing to do whatever it took to earn a place in their lives. After breakfast with his mother, Mark headed to a nearby toy store. He wanted to surprise the girls with something special, a small but meaningful gesture to show his commitment to connecting with them. He strolled down the aisles, glancing at dolls, board games, and stuffed animals, trying to picture what the girls might like most. Finally, he settled on an art kit with paints and a building set that brought back memories of his own childhood. When he got back to the house, the girls were already awake, sitting on the couch watching cartoons. As he walked in with the bags, their eyes lit up with curiosity. Mark approached them and knelt down, showing off the gifts. "I thought we could do something fun together later. What do you think?" he asked, trying not to sound too nervous. The three girls exchanged glances, clearly excited, but a bit shy. Finally, one of them, the boldest, stepped forward and grabbed the art kit. "Can we paint now?" she asked with a smile that instantly put Mark at ease. They spent the next hour at the dining table, drawing and painting together. Although Mark wasn't exactly talented with a brush, the girls giggled at his clumsy attempts, which helped break the ice. Elizabeth watched from the kitchen, feeling moved by how much effort Mark was putting into connecting with her daughters. Later, he decided to take them to a nearby park. They packed a ball and the building set, spending the afternoon playing under the warm sun. The girls ran, laughed, and competed with each other while Mark trailed behind, amazed by their energy and creativity. For the first time in years, he felt a genuine bond forming, and he couldn't help but wonder how he had gone so long without experiencing something like this. Back at the house, as the girls rested in the living room, Elizabeth took the opportunity to talk with Mark. "You did a great job today. They're warming up to you faster than I expected," she said, sitting beside him on the couch. "I want them to see me as someone they can rely on, someone who'll always be there for them," Mark replied, his voice steady with determination. "I know it'll take time, but I'm ready to put in the work." Elizabeth nodded, feeling relieved to see how seriously he was taking this. Still, she knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. "They're giving you a chance, but they'll need more than that. Consistency is what matters. It's not enough to show up for a couple of days. They need to know you're a stable presence in their lives," she said, meeting his gaze. "I understand, Elizabeth, I'm not going anywhere. This is just the beginning," he answered, with a sincerity she couldn't ignore. That night, Mark decided to stay at his mother's house so he could spend more time with the girls. During dinner, he listened intently as they chatted about their classes, friends, and favorite books. He was surprised by how bright and insightful they were, and despite just getting to know them, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. After the girls went to bed, Mark and Elizabeth sat in the living room again. This time, their conversation shifted to the future. "I've been thinking about how we can make this work," Mark said. "I want the three of you to move in with me. I don't want to feel like I'm just popping in and out of your lives. I need you to know I'm here to stay," Mark said, his voice steady but filled with hope. Elizabeth looked at him, taken aback. The idea of moving in together hadn't crossed her mind. At least, not this soon. "Mark, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but this isn't just about you and what you want. The girls need stability, and uprooting everything all of a sudden might be too much for them," she said. He nodded, understanding her hesitation. "You're right. I don't want to rush anything, but I want you to know my intention, that I want us to be a family, no matter how long it takes to make that happen." Elizabeth studied him for a moment, searching his face for sincerity. Though she still had doubts, she decided to give him the benefit of the doubt. We'll take it one day at a time. If you're truly committed, we'll see it over time." In the days that followed, Mark worked hard to prove his dedication. He walked the girls to school, helped them with their homework, and joined in their games. While there were still awkward moments, the girls gradually began to see him as a consistent presence in their lives. Elizabeth couldn't help but notice the changes in Mark. He wasn't the same man she'd walked away from years ago. This Mark was more thoughtful, more willing to listen and adapt to the needs of others. One afternoon, while at the park, the girls started building a tower with blocks. Mark joined in, laughing when the blocks tumbled and celebrating when they managed to build something stable. In that moment, Elizabeth realized that maybe time and experience had shaped Mark into someone who could truly be a good father to her daughters. That night, after the girls were asleep, Elizabeth and Mark had another heart-to-heart. "I know this will take time, but I want you to know I'm willing to try for our daughters and for what we once had," Elizabeth said, her voice filled with hope. Mark reached for her hand and nodded, feeling for the first time in years that he was on the right path. He knew there was still a long way to go, but he was determined to earn back Elizabeth's trust and the love of her daughters. Redemption wouldn't be easy, but Mark was ready to do the work. For the first time, he understood that success wasn't about contracts or accolades. It was about the love and connections he could build with the people who mattered most. Christmas morning was peaceful at Mark's mother's house. The sunlight gently streamed through windows adorned with garlands, and the scent of hot chocolate filled the air. The girls were the first to wake, bursting with excitement to see the gifts waiting under the tree. The sound of laughter echoed through the house as the children dashed into the living room, where the towering Christmas tree stood, adorned with twinkling lights and sparkling ornaments. Elizabeth, still half asleep, emerged from her bedroom to find the girls rummaging excitedly through the brightly wrapped packages. A smile crept across her face as she watched their joy. Meanwhile, Mark, who had decided to spend the holidays at his mother's house, was already in the kitchen, lending a hand with breakfast. He wore an apron that hung awkwardly loose on him, something the girls instantly noticed, sparking playful teasing. Mark approached Elizabeth with a steaming mug of coffee and handed it to her. She accepted it with a gentle smile, grateful for the thoughtful gesture. Together, they stood, watching the girls tear into their first gifts, savoring the calmness of the moment, a rarity neither of them took for granted. The hours flew by amidst games, laughter, and minor kitchen mishaps as everyone pitched in to prepare Christmas lunch. Mark's mother oversaw the preparations with care, ensuring every detail was just right. It was clear she relished having the family gathered under one roof, something that hadn't happened in years. When they finally sat down for the meal, the atmosphere brimmed with warmth and gratitude. The food was simple yet delightful, and conversations flowed easily as everyone shared stories and memories. The girls, as energetic as ever, chattered non-stop about their presents and plans for later. During the meal, Mark stood, raised his glass, and addressed the room, his voice thick with emotion. "I want to thank you all for letting me be here today. These past weeks have been a gift I never expected. Elizabeth, thank you for allowing me into your lives, and to you, little ones, thank you for teaching me the meaning of true happiness." The room fell silent for a moment before the girls erupted in applause, beaming with excitement. Elizabeth's gaze softened as she looked at Mark, acknowledging the heartfelt effort he was making to become a part of their lives. After lunch, the family headed out to the backyard, where the girls played an enthusiastic game of catch while the adults looked on. Unable to resist, Mark jumped in, chasing the ball and laughing freely in a way Elizabeth hadn't seen in years. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, the children returned to the living room, where the fireplace cast a warm glow. They snuggled together on the couch under soft blankets as Elizabeth read a Christmas story aloud. Mark watched from a nearby chair, captivated by the bond Elizabeth shared with her daughters. It was a scene he had never envisioned for himself, yet now he couldn't imagine letting it go. Later in the evening, Mark found Elizabeth in the kitchen as she tidied up the last of the dishes. He stood quietly for a moment before speaking. "Today has been one of the happiest days of my life. Thank you for giving me this chance, Elizabeth. I know I can't undo the past, but I want you to know I'm fully committed to our future and to our daughter's future." Elizabeth looked at him with a mix of surprise and emotion. Over the past few weeks, she had seen a completely different side of Mark. Someone willing to work hard for the people he loved. "I know, Mark. There's still a lot to rebuild, but I believe we're heading in the right direction," she said, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. At that moment, their daughters, curious as ever, burst into the kitchen, interrupting the conversation. They wrapped their little arms around Mark's legs, begging him to tell them another bedtime story. He couldn't say no, and led them back to the living room, where the family gathered around the fireplace. Mark's mother, sitting in a rocking chair nearby, watched the scene unfold with a contented smile. For her, this Christmas was about more than just festive traditions. It was proof of how love and forgiveness could transform lives. Before heading to bed, the girls insisted on hanging their Christmas stockings on the mantel, hoping they'd be brimming with treats by morning. Mark helped them, making sure everything was just right. As he tucked them into bed, each of them kissed his cheek, a gesture that deeply moved him. That night, while the rest of the house slept, Mark stayed in the living room, gazing at the Christmas tree and reflecting on how much his life had changed in such a short time. He realized he'd found something money could never buy: a family. When Elizabeth noticed he wasn't in bed, she came downstairs and found him sitting on the couch. Quietly, she joined him, sitting by his side in silence before finally speaking. "You've done so much these past few weeks, Mark. The girls adore you, and I'm starting to see the man I once fell in love with." Her words took him by surprise, but he was grateful. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," he replied sincerely. "I want to be here for you, not just today, but always." A tear rolled down Elizabeth's cheek as she nodded. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was willing to try. This Christmas had brought more than just gifts and celebrations. It had brought an opportunity to start over, to heal old wounds and build a future together. That night, as the clock struck midnight, Mark and Elizabeth shared an embrace that symbolized far more than the end of a special day. It marked the beginning of a new chapter, a life they were ready to face together as a family. If you enjoyed this story, share your thoughts in the comments. Your feedback means the world to us. Stay tuned, because we're sure you'll love the next story that's already waiting for you on screen. Click the video now and get ready to be amazed.